A babysitter caught on camera, lashing young boys with a belt more than 50 times, according to their family. That disturbing footage sparking outrage and now criminal charges. That woman, a New York caretaker, now facing jail time after prosecutors say the attack went far beyond discipline. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You're watching Law and Crime. After weeks on the run, Lakeisha Jackson is now in custody, charged with assaulting children in a Bronx apartment. The alleged abuse captured on a home surveillance camera.
So guess what's about to happen?
Papa.
You're right, I warned you.
Behind the blurred video, the cries of children. Jackson seen striking them with a thick leather belt.
Drop him. Drop him. Drop your pants. No.
The family says Jackson whipped the children 58 times and claims the violence did not stop there. Jackson is also accused of slamming a child into a bed and striking another with a hanger. The boys, 2, 4, and 6 years old, had been under her care for nearly a year. She was assigned by an agency contracted through the Administration for Children's Services, a city-run program that offers in-home support to struggling families. The alleged abuse was uncovered in May when the boy's grandmother happened to check a live feed from cameras inside the home. Reportedly stunned by what she saw, the family filed a police report the very next day. Jackson was terminated by the ACS contracted agency once officials were made aware of the footage. And the family says that video was just the beginning, claiming there are at least 10 separate recordings showing Jackson allegedly physically assaulting the children. Jackson was arrested and appeared to smirk as NYPD detectives led her from the Bronx Special Victims Unit in handcuffs. Now she's facing a slew of charges, including 2 counts of assault in the second degree and 3 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, according to prosecutors. The family's attorney issued a statement to WABC saying, "Our clients can rest easier now knowing that Miss Jackson is no longer on the street. We thank the NYPD for helping this family heal and ensuring there will be accountability for Miss Jackson's actions." And here to break down this story with me is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Serena Townsend. Serena, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Kennedi.
So this was not a one-time incident, right? Videos allegedly show repeated abuse. Does that impact how prosecutors build their case? Could that even open the door to additional charges?
Absolutely. First of all, it definitely affects the willingness of the prosecution to plead the case out, to give a favorable disposition to her. I mean, knowing that somebody didn't just slip up once, had a bad day, did something, that they regret is very different from seeing this repeated pattern of abuse. And they could charge her multiple times for each incident.
I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring this news package. Odoo is a powerful all-in-one business software that helps you manage everything from sales to accounting and, yes, inventory. Their inventory dashboard makes it easy to track receipts, delivery orders, POS orders, and see what's waiting, late, or back ordered at a glance. You can pay for receipts, automate vendor reminders, and schedule deliveries all in just a few clicks. Plus, you get full warehouse management, the ability to set picking strategies, and real-time stock visibility. And the best part, Odoo's inventory app syncs seamlessly with your sales and e-commerce apps, so everything stays connected. So right now you can get a free 15-day trial of Odoo's all-in-one business solution and see how it can make your life easier. Check it out at odoo.com/lcnewsinventory. Is it significant that the video evidence also comes with audio? Because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about surveillance footage and you see it, which is still bad, but I think it's even more jarring that you can hear what the suspect is saying, how she asked the boys to come here. You can hear all the audio, the boys crying. How does that change a jury's perception?
Oh, what a great question and what a great point. That is so true. It is rare enough to have surveillance of an incident, let alone surveillance that's video and audio. It, of course, will affect a jury immensely because, you could hardly excuse the beatings that are shown But sometimes, maybe you're able to say like, oh, I was trying to speak to them, or they weren't that hurt, or it didn't actually make contact. But here, there is absolutely no denying it. The jury might as well be sitting there while it's happening, watching and listening. So it is huge evidence for the prosecution.
In a case like this, does the court ever consider whether the caregiver thought she was, quote, disciplining the kids?
Yeah, sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, corporal punishment is not a crime, and this is just how we raise children. This is how I was raised, and this is how I think you teach children respect." Sometimes people do go there, but in this type of scenario where you really see, there was pain, there was anguish, there was anger, it goes back to your other question of hearing the audio, not just seeing it. If you were, listening in and you heard somebody trying to teach them a lesson and having a calm voice, and, that is very different from what we're seeing here, where you can tell that she was actually angry and, this was pretty vicious.
For those people that may consider, hitting your child with a belt, I mean, what is just that legal line between discipline and criminal abuse?
Well, this is all happening in New York City. As you know, I'm a New York City defense attorney, former prosecutor in New York City. It's really never been okay. I mean, I've been practicing for almost 20 years now, and I've not seen a prosecution just dismiss their own charges because somebody said, hey, this is just corporal punishment. Certainly there's a little bit of a, leeway if you're going to, smack a kid very lightly on the butt, something like, come on, if that's, not causing pain. That's not assault. That wouldn't be considered assault, on the basketball court either, right? If you get a good shot, something that is just clearly an encouraging motion rather than something intended to cause violence or pain is really where the line is. And there's really not going to be much leniency in this type of situation.
What I found was interesting was that the family didn't just hire this woman because they, heard about her or anything like that. This woman was actually placed in the home by a city linked agency. What kind of background checks are typically done before someone's allowed to work in a home with children? Because if you're ever going to trust a babysitter, I'm assuming you would trust one that has been verified by the city.
It's so upsetting to hear that. And it's true. This is something that the parents probably relied on, that the agency did their vetting appropriately. Unfortunately, we see this happen frequently. And ACS is no stranger to bad press, to bad news, to these kinds of, either negligence or aggression. It's a really troubled agency from what I know. And I worked in the city for 16 years. The reputation is not great. So the vetting that needed to happen either didn't happen well enough, in my opinion, or they need to change their protocols, because it shouldn't just be about whether somebody has a criminal record, which of course they're going to vet that. But it's not just about that. You have to check references. You have to meet a person. You have to conduct a very thorough interview and see kind of who they are. These are people that you're putting into homes to care for the most vulnerable people that exist in our city, children and elderly. I mean, those are the people we must protect. Those are the people that, with caregivers, you have to vet aggressively.
Absolutely. And can we consider that during this investigation, police are also, if she worked in any other homes, probably asking those parents and if they felt their child was in danger while in her care?
They absolutely should. They absolutely should. If they're going to conduct a full and fair and unbiased investigation here, this case should not just begin and end with this one family. They should be opening up all of this woman's records, checking in with the families that had her in their home. I'm sure the parents who did have her in their home are very concerned about their children. And they're going to want those detectives to ask the right questions to see if maybe there were more instances of abuse here.
Does that agency have legal liability?
Yes, they absolutely could. It depends on what is uncovered, but I know that there's a lawsuit, and there should be a lawsuit against the companies and the ACS agency that employed her, because if there wasn't enough training, or they knew or should have known that, she was doing this, there's many, many ways where you could attack the agency itself, liability wise. And they need to be careful about these kinds of things for that reason, and because we actually care about our children and we don't want them harmed.
What kind of civil damages could the family pursue?
So they could pursue damages relating, obviously, to all of the injuries sustained by the children. And they could essentially say that if not for ACS's poor vetting, poor training, or lack of oversight, any of those things could have caused, they have to show the link between that and the damage suffered by the family, that being obviously emotional and physical damage to the children. So yeah, as long as they can show that link, there could be liability here.
What's the next step now that the suspect has been charged?
So she's been arraigned, which is kind of the first step in a criminal process. And now the case basically continues. So the prosecutor has to turn over discovery. That's any evidence that they have been able to uncover through the investigation by the detectives. They have to turn all of that over to her defense attorney so that she can prepare her defense. That discovery obligation is ongoing, by the way. And so because ACS is claiming that they're conducting their own internal investigation, I think DOI, the New York City Department of Investigation, which has oversight capabilities, I think they are conducting an independent investigation. So all of the paperwork and evidence that's uncovered in all of these investigations has to be turned over to the defense. And then essentially the defense gets to, put forth their motions or any claims that they're going to make, evidence that they want suppressed, for example. And then eventually it will conclude with either a plea or a trial.
And throughout that investigation, as they investigate ACS and go through all of their records, if it comes out that the agency ignored red flags or complaints, how does that change things legally? Because I know we talked about civil liability, but could anyone face additional criminal charges?
So it would probably, I wouldn't expect it, but it's not unheard of. If there's, clear malicious negligence, then potentially there's a possibility of like a reckless assault type of charge rather than an active assault like she had committed. But I wouldn't expect criminal charges here. I think that most of the blame criminally is going to go to the actor herself. But the agency is going to be potentially facing the civil liability.
Could Jackson be offered a plea deal?
She could. Sometimes families don't want to put their children on the stand. I mean, these children are so young, some of them too young to even be able to testify. And so a big consideration that a prosecutor has is, what is justice? It is a prosecutor's job to seek justice, not necessarily just to get the highest penalty or whatever. What does justice look like? And justice could look like, a preference for a plea rather than to expose these children to the horrors of having to face this woman again at a trial, or the trauma of doing that. So it's very, very possible that in order to keep these kids off the stand, a plea happens here.
Well, let's talk about hypothetically if a plea doesn't happen, and would they then need the kids to testify, or will the video evidence be enough? Because it is jarring to see. And I think, like how you said, the kids are young. I think 6 years old, 4 years old, 2 years old. The 4 and 2 year old may be too young to testify, but at least for that 6-year-old, how would that work?
Yeah, the video is going to save the day, to be honest with you. Typically, there's no video of an incident, and you do need the victim or a witness to testify. Here, I wouldn't be surprised if they put the 6-year-old on the stand, so long as the 6-year-old is competent enough to be able to articulate what happened, and then show the video. I mean, what the prosecution has to show is that A, she did it, and B, it caused them pain. Normally, you need that victim to take the stand and say, I saw her do it and it caused me pain. Here, the video very easily shows that it's her, and you can hear the crying and the sad screams of the children indicating the pain, plus medical records would help support that as well.
If she pleads guilty, how does that affect the sentencing process? And that would be, of course, I'm assuming a plea deal.
Right. So essentially, if she takes a plea, then it essentially gives her and her defense attorney the ability to negotiate that plea rather than leaving it in a judge's hands, which would be the case if she went to trial. So she would be able to negotiate this with the prosecution, and the plea deal is typically lower than what you would face if you went to trial and lost. So they would be able to work something out there.
If convicted without a deal, what kind of sentence is she realistically facing?
So I believe that she's facing assault in the second degree charges, which is a D felony. And it carries in New York, at least even if you don't have a record, 2 to 7 years in prison. Now, it's an interesting question that you ask because technically she could be facing just the 2 to 7, or because she committed the crime to multiple people over multiple different instances, a judge technically could sentence her what's called consecutively instead of concurrently, meaning 2 to 7 years plus an additional 2 to 7 years plus an additional 2 to 7 years every time she did it to each kid. So she could be facing a ton of time.
Well, let's dive a little more into that because I know the family is claiming through reports that there were other instances where the suspect allegedly beat the children, and we could assume that that is also on that surveillance, that home surveillance footage. Would she get charged per instance? So let's say they have 5 videos of
Mhm.
her allegedly hitting the kids. Would it be okay, a charge for this day in January, another charge in February, another charge in March? Like, how would that work?
Yeah, they absolutely could, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did. You could charge for every single incident, every single what we call a time and place of occurrence gets its own charge, and each child gets their own, charge. So she could be charged 3 different times for one incident, and then each incident above and beyond that 3 different times for the assault. That is, as long as she did assault each one in each incident. And then probably the endangering the welfare of a child. Again, you could charge that crime just once as like an overall thing, but technically she could be charged for each incident as well.
Does the fact that the children are so young play into sentencing decisions?
Sure. I mean, anything that happens in a case, it's taken as a totality of circumstances when you decide on what the appropriate sentence is. Not only, what happened to the child, but also the defendant's own, situation. Does the defendant have priors, or do they not? Is this their first, interaction with the criminal justice system? So everything is taken into account. And so, yeah, I mean, a judge is probably going to say, and a prosecutor is going to say, like, it's one thing to smack around a teenager, which is not okay either, but it's certainly another thing for a toddler. I mean, it's really, really heinous, this crime. So I think that's going to play a role into their decision on what a proper plea offer would be.
If you were her defense attorney, how would you go about fighting this case?
Honestly, this is a type of situation where you're probably not going to walk out with a not guilty all across the board. What I would do is I would argue for any sort of lenience or mitigation here because of a few things. I would say, look, this is her first interaction with the legal system. Yes, what you saw was really bad and you do have the proof of it, but let her be rehabilitated. Don't send her away for, 15 years or something like that. I mean, she's a young woman. She's never been arrested before. Give her a chance to be rehabilitated. Yes, maybe she could walk into prison for a little bit, but maybe probation is better for her. Maybe she, would benefit from training and like programs on anger management and things like that. And then I would probably also rely on the fact that ACS hired and placed her. I would say, look, they thought she was capable. They thought that she was doing okay and they did their vetting. And so, if they were able to vouch for her, then, she probably thought that what she was doing was okay. And this is a situation where she needs to be taught that she's not allowed to do that rather than punished, in the most extreme way. And so I would try to negotiate a lower jail sentence, but I just don't think that she's going to walk away scot-free regardless.
Right. And just, I'm assuming it's a lot harder, for the defense to win sympathy from a jury when it involves children.
Absolutely. And again, when you have that level of evidence, that video, that audio, you hear the children crying, it's like nobody's going to have sympathy for this woman.
With this case making headlines, could her attorney try to move the trial out of the Bronx?
They could try, but it probably wouldn't be super successful. I understand your point completely. I mean, basically, is the jury pool, the potential jury pool already tainted because they've seen this pretty seriously bad evidence already. But a lot of times that does happen. And the remedy is not necessarily to move the trial, although I do think sometimes defense attorneys will argue that she simply can't get a fair trial because of that.
And just looking at the timeline here, we know trials take time. Realistically, when do you think we could see things start to move forward?
Yeah, they do take time. As judges try to move cases to trial faster if the individual is incarcerated rather than, out on bail. So if she's incarcerated, then we might see things be a little bit faster than some other cases. But in order to get to trial, yeah, it usually takes close to a year to do that.
Well, this is a story that we will be following closely. Serena, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Kennedi. It's always a pleasure.
Jackson's bail was set at $75,000, and she is due back in court on August 12th. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.